This is the I Read Comic Books podcast, the very best podcast for regular comic book fans. I'm Mike Rapin, and joining me this week, that feeling when you listen to the Monster Mash and you realize this song is just about another song. What the hell? This week, I'm joined by our good friend from the Comics That We Love podcast, Zach McCreary.
Ahoy, hoy.
And from the Next Issue podcast, our good pal, Danny.
I don't know what that means, Mike, but I'm going to take it as a compliment.
Yeah. You're both kind of wrapped up into this one feeling for me. That's how I'm feeling today. This week, our plan was to have Scott McMahon on the show. Unfortunately, he had to cancel due to an illness that befell his household. So he checked out. We're going to have him back on the show in the near future. So today, we're here to talk about comic books. And that is the thing that I love to do every single week with folks. I've read some really good comics, but I'm curious to know what Zach and Danny read. So let me ask the legally mandated questions that I have for this show, which is, how have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Zach.
Man, I've been good. I took a little bit of a hiatus from podcasting, and thank you for letting me borrow an episode from this show to fill my feed and give my listeners something to do. But
of course,
it was nice. I needed it. There were weddings and birthdays, and it was just too much stuff. But I've gotten back, and I'm in the swing of podcasting. It feels good. Reading, getting caught up on my stack again, and so I'm loving it. And I read some pretty fun stuff this week. One that's been on my stack since I first saw the cover for the first issue. I was like, this is one for me. And that is a book called Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees. Have either of you read this book?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, this book rules. I have a hardcover copy of this book coming. I almost bought the softcover at the shop yesterday because I'm like, do I need to reread this right now? I love it.
For real. Shout out to Tessa Gray. Tessa is a nerd on Instagram. She pointed me in the direction of this book initially, and I finally got to reading it. Written and illustrated by Patrick Horvath, with letters by Hassan Atzman Elhau. Shout out to the I Read Comic Books website for giving me the correct pronunciation. I wanted to make sure I got his name right. I described this book to a friend earlier as if Disney did Dexter, because that's what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right? Like that's the vibe that I get. I love it. And for anyone who hasn't read it, it's basically this world of cuddly anthropomorphic animals in a quiet village of Woodbrook, and a murder takes place during the bicentennial celebration of the town. And now it's up to the secret serial killer living in Woodbrook, but never killing there, to figure out who it is and stop the killings before any arrows start pointing back to them. And I love the story. It's such a simple idea, but it's done with such bright, vibrant colors and cutely drawn animals and creatures, and it looks more like a kid's picture book than a mystery, like a dark mystery comic. And it just gets so wild when you start seeing just the carnage and the and the murder that takes place in this book. Like, when that duck gets killed, I was like, oh, here we go. This is happening.
Yeah. It is surprisingly one of the most like gruesome comics ever, right? Like, it's like Richard Scarry comics. Do you remember Richard Scarry, like the busy world of Richard Scarry with the little earthworm inside the Apple car and stuff? Like, it looks like that, but it is gruesome. Like viscerally disgusting in some of the pages where murders and serial killer stuff is happening. Like, it's such a surprising, jarring book, but in one of the most entertaining ways I've read in a while.
Yeah, it's so cutesy and yet does not shy away from visceral gore and violence when it's needed. But it's not overboard either, which makes it even more stark when it happens, which I think is what kind of drives that side of the book. But yeah, the story is fun, and it's one of those weird situations where, just like something like Dexter or Breaking Bad, it makes you kind of think about yourself and society, in that this other person is also a murderer, and they've murdered a lot more people, but I am rooting for them to not get caught. Why am I doing that?
Right.
I watched them murder someone. Like, I watched them murder an innocent person at the beginning of this, and yet I'm still like, ooh, I hope they don't get caught.
Yes.
Why? Why am I like this?
Yeah, it's such an interesting book in that regard, that you're rooting for the less bad guy, I guess is what it comes down to. And I feel like Horvath does a really good job in his writing to make you feel extremely sympathetic towards the main character, the protagonist of this book, especially compared to who becomes the villain or what the villain is eventually revealed to be.
Right.
So it's a really, I don't know, it's a really jarring, but I think super super fun read. Like, it's dark, but I can't help but recommend it to everybody I talk to about it.
Absolutely. It's now on my list of recommendations when people want one, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I had never read any of Horvath's work that I can remember, but I picked this up because I got sent the preview, and I was like, "Oh, this looks interesting," and I started reading. Like, I had to go month to month on this. There was definitely no waiting on it. I was like, I need to figure out the mystery. I need to find out what's going on. I can also see this like coming back with a different story. I think it'd be fun to
Totally.
kind of explore more of this world if Horvath has another story to tell. Before, like something prior, like a prequel or something following up the events of the book.
Oh
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
either would work.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of Dexter. Like, I love that TV show. So like when the description of this said Dexter meets Richard Scarry's Busy Town, which that part I'm not familiar with, but I could kind of tell that it was that cutesy aesthetic that
Mm-hmm.
we see in the art. I was like, oh yeah, this is amazing. It's perfect. So yeah, I'm glad you checked it out, Zach.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, the trade just came out too. So anyone else who's interested, it's out there, folks. You can get the whole collected miniseries.
Heck yeah. That's what I did.
Sick, sick. Well, Danny, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been?
Before we get into how I've been, I want to issue an apology to all the listeners of the show.
Oh no.
Last time I was on was the Renee episode,
Mm-hmm.
um, where I had at the top of my pile the Barbarian Batman book. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that was a pre-recorded episode, and a few weeks after when the episode actually came out, I found out that the book had been delayed by DC.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I didn't
Mm-hmm.
need to
Oh.
mislead anyone.
Yeah.
But that was funny when it was happening. I was like, "Oh no, this book isn't out," and
Right, right.
we already recorded the episode.
The best part about that is that you showed up to that episode knowing you were pre-recording. You're like, Mike, I'm picking books that are coming out the day this episode releases, and I was like, great, that's awesome. You were so confident about it, man.
That's right. And it was such a cool book. I got
Roll the
everyone
dice.
on board immediately
Yeah,
on that episode.
I was on board, man. I was waiting for it.
So it's LB, and it is what it is. Luckily, other comics book have been coming out. But as far as what I've been doing, it's fall anime season, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit in the after show.
Yeah.
I also have seen the Joker, which seems to be pretty divisive
Mm-hmm.
on the internet.
Yeah.
But the big thing yesterday, as you guys may or may not know, I play a trading card game called Star Wars Unlimited.
Yeah.
So yesterday I spent 10 hours playing the game because we had our planetary qualifier, which is like one of the biggest tournaments they have, which, the winner gets like a ticket to go to nationals and like all this stuff.
Oh
So
man.
I am mentally fatigued.
Sure.
And I was
10
like,
hours? 10 hours of
yeah,
trading card games,
That's
man?
a
That's
long
crazy.
yeah, because it's the rounds are like an hour and it's 7 rounds and then you top cut. And I was also there shooting some video and stuff for a vlog. But yeah, when I saw Mike's message like, "Hey, can you jump on the episode?" I was like, "All right, hopefully I can bring the energy." Luckily, I'm always reading comics, so like that part's taken care of.
Right.
All right. Now, as far as comics have been fantastic. I think we are on like some kind of upswing that I don't remember ever being in a way, at least not in a long time.
I mean, Krakoa was the big upswing, I think, for a minute, in my opinion. But that's maybe I'm biased. But I feel you. I feel what you mean because I have some thoughts about that as well.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna say, if you have not read The Ultimates #4, I think this may be my best single issue comic book that I've read all year.
Ooh.
Wow.
So just throwing that out there. I don't want to raise the bar too high, but man, oh man, Deniz Camp and guest artist Phil Noto, like they really, really delivered like a really special issue of a comic book, I think. So
Ooh.
really fun stuff. But
Okay.
I'm intrigued.
I mean, I'm caught up on Ultimates. I didn't realize number 4 was out, so I feel like I need to read this immediately after we finish recording. I think that's what I'm going to do. Thank you. Thank you.
Same.
great.
Because that one's towards the top of my pile too. Danny and I did an episode on my show a little while ago talking about what we were thinking, and like all of the Ultimate stuff basically had 3 issues out, and we talked about like what did we think of it so far. And I have just been in love with everything being done in this new Ultimate universe, including that Ultimates book.
Dude.
But I too did not realize the 4th one was out, and I'm excited.
Yeah, the Ultimates line has been killer. Like, especially, I cannot get over how good the Spider-Man book is. Like, I'm mad at how
Oh
good
my
the
God,
Spider-Man
yeah.
book is. But the Ultimates book is like the exact thing that I would want out of an Ultimates book, in that it's exactly what Mark Millar did way back when he was doing his first Ultimates run, where it was kind of just this big FU to what the Avengers are, while also just being like super edgy and out there. And I feel like Mark Millar's edginess is one thing, but I feel like Deniz Camp's edginess is like, we're going to talk about how the destruction of the systems that we exist in is the most important thing we could do in all universes, including the real world, right? Like, I love what he's done. And I don't know how number 4 goes with all of that, but I feel like that's the vibe that I've been getting, and I am so glad that no one seems to be holding him back from telling that kind of story.
Yeah, it's been amazing stuff. So hopefully you guys can catch up and let me know that maybe I'm just going into this like too hopeful. But man, after I read that book, I read it again.
Whoa.
That
man.
rarely happens because I got a lot of books to read.
Hell yeah. But what did you actually read on top of the Ultimates book that you want to talk about, Danny?
What did I actually read on top of the 20 books that are sitting on my desk? My friends over at Dynamite sent me over the Terminator #1, which comes out as of the day of when you're listening to this.
Ooh.
This is a comic book written by Declan Shalvey, who you may know from Thundercats, also a Dynamite book, or Old Dog, which is an Image book, and also with art by Luke Sparrow, with Colin Cracker and letters by Jeff Eckleberry. Now, I really like the Terminator as a franchise. I love the movies. I don't think there's like a really bad Terminator film. I think there's just some that are not as good as the ones that are really, really good.
There's some that are not as good as Terminator 2. That's
right.
Just say what you need to say.
That's the gist. Yeah.
So I was interested when this was announced because I was like, okay, what are they gonna do, right? How many Terminator stories are there really? And it turns out that they found a fun way to do more stories. So in this book, the plans to kill Sarah Connor and John have failed, but Skynet, like, they have all the resources, right? They're a machine, they can learn and adapt. So there's still a few ways to kind of erase things from the past. So what they are doing in this book is they are targeting different specific individuals that are a big part of the resistance in the future, or maybe like the people, their relatives in the past are big targets for the resistance. So they're going after all those people. So now everyone is Sarah Connor, or everyone could be, John Connor. And it's a fun way to just go in back and tell other stories in this world without having to worry about explaining anything. So it's really, really cool. I think one of my favorite things is that the Terminator as a character is got such an intimidating design, like just on its own, right? Because it's usually like a gigantic, imposing figure. Then the more damage you do to the Terminator, the more terrifying it gets. Because you start seeing under the skin, like the machine underneath. So that's a lot of fun. I think it's a really fun year to be a Terminator fan because you have that anime on Netflix is also pretty fantastic from what I've seen.
Yeah, Hugh in the chat was saying 3 episodes
so
in, they like it quite a bit.
Oh yeah, it's great. It's nice. A little bit of a slow burn, but it's only 8 episodes. It's Matt Tomlinson who co-wrote wrote the Batman film from 2022 is the one running that show. So like I was already pretty excited for that because he also wrote that Batman Imposter book. So, but as far as this book, I think Shelby just has a really fun style when it comes to writing this type of action story. And it's really fun to kind of drop in the sci-fi twist from a Terminator franchise. And then, like I said, the art just goes into this whole, how do I make this unkillable, unstopping machine even more menacing? So, yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. Highly recommend you check it out.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm always hesitant on these licensed products, but it seems strangely enough that Dynamite is doing some good with their licensed books. I read the Powerpuff Girls issue, the first issue that I read, incredible, like perfect. It's exactly what I wanted.
Really?
And to hear that this is good, I heard the Thundercats book was pretty good too.
Yeah.
So like
I've heard
I
good
mean,
things
I
about
don't
that
know.
one. Yeah.
Dynamite, what's happening? Are you guys getting away from a zillion covers, working with Comicsgate people
Oh no,
and,
no.
and
Well,
stuff like
they
that?
still got
Oh,
a zillion covers.
oh, okay, still a
Yeah,
zillion
yeah,
covers.
yeah.
Okay, all right, but maybe there's some quality comics under those covers. I guess that's maybe what I'm hoping for. Well, let me talk really quick about books that I've been reading. It seems to me that the way that I read comics now is just in huge batches. I don't read like a couple comics a day, which is maybe the healthy thing. Instead, I read like 500 pages of comics in a sitting, and then 2 or 3 days will go by, and I'll read another 500 pages. So that's kind of been my MO for the last couple of weeks, especially since I got back from Japan. It's like I feel like I just don't have time because I'm trying to catch up on a million other things like TV and other things that I wasn't doing. But yeah, I sat down and I read Public Domain. I think I started the new arc, and so I read the latest 3 issues. I just want to be. That's not the book I want to talk about, but I just want to shout it out because honestly, I have so much fun reading this book, and I'm calling this now. This is going to be the Western comics version of Bakuman, which is a manga series about making manga. And I feel like Chip Zdarsky is doing a fantastic job of just kind of showing the ups and downs of making a comic while also poking fun at the entire comics industry in like a very fun manner. Like he's not cynical and he's not trying to be shitty about it. He's just kind of poking fun at, I think, all the things that we as big comic book fans, even if you're not a huge comic book fan, if you're kind of just like around comics in any capacity, you can maybe understand some of this, while also telling a really entertaining story. So I just really love this book.
Mike, question. Now that you're so into the public domain, are you also going to read the spin-off comic, The Domain?
The Domain, yeah.
Which is about the comic within the comic.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I think I have to now, right? It's such a funny concept. And I love that. I feel like when I saw the covers for that book, I didn't really understand it because I was like, well, isn't the Domain this? According to the, big series that's happening inside the comic book. And yeah, as you read the comic book, the Public Domain, the series, you understand why the Domain comic book that's being published by Image is the way that it is. Again, all bits and fun, and I'm very excited. So I think I have to, Danny. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Great.
Chip Zdarsky is like the mad scientist of comics.
Yeah.
And I'm always here for it.
Absolutely. But the book I really want to talk about this week is Universal Monsters Frankenstein #1 and 2. This is by Michael Walsh. If you haven't been following, Image under the Skybound imprint has been publishing all of these Universal monster books. Like they did a Dracula one, which is really good. That was James Tynion and Martin Simmons. Ram V and Dan Waters did a book, The Creature from the Black Lagoon. I think it was like a sequel series. Yep. And Universal Monsters Frankenstein is now out. This is by Michael Walsh, like I said. And it follows the Frankenstein story, right? You get to see the body being dug up from the grave, the lightning striking the monster coming to life. But Michael Walsh is doing the Frankenstein story, but from like different perspectives and different angles that you wouldn't have necessarily seen if you just watched the original Frankenstein movie. So you get all of the classic horror stuff from back when this movie was first released. And I want to say it was in the 30s. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but you get all of the Frankenstein story, but you get these other perspectives, like the Dr. Frankenstein's assistant, a little boy whose dad maybe has a piece of his body attached to the Frankenstein monster. You get all of these different things. I mean, in just 2 issues, it's a very like interesting, different take on Frankenstein without getting rid of any of the Frankenstein story. Plus his art, Michael Walsh clearly loves to draw horror. I think he says it in the back of the first issue. Like he loves drawing horror. If you read his Silver Coin series that he drew and worked with a bunch of writers on, you'll understand like he's got a passion for this and he wants to experiment with color and sound and everything that makes a great horror comic a horror comic. And you can see him just flexing nonstop in this book. It's an absolutely beautiful series. The covers that you can get for this book by Walsh and a couple of other people are beautiful as well. I went with the A covers for the copies that I bought, but there are some B, C, and D covers that are just phenomenal. And I think Walsh does another variant on top of that. But yeah, this is an amazing book. I highly suggest you check it out if you have any remote interest in just seeing a slight retelling of the Frankenstein story that keeps all the elements that you know and adds a couple new elements on to keep it fresh. This book just rules. I think it's going to make a fantastic collection, but getting the single issues is totally worth it, especially if if you want to collect some of those variant covers. And I'm not really someone who encourages people to buy variant covers. This is one of those books where I'm like, no, they are going hard as hell on the covers, and I love every single one of them. So go read Universal Monsters Frankenstein. You are going to have a great time. I promise you.
Well, I have read Universal Monsters Frankenstein.
I would hope.
I could not agree with you more. I mean, I love all the Universal Monsters books. They're so much fun in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
I like the approach in this one that it's like, it's not really an anthology, but it's like, feels like it could. The point of view is kind of like anthology, but it's all related to this overarching story of Frankenstein and the creation of the monster, right? So it's great. I love Michael Walsh's art. It's not, sometimes horror comic artists feel like they have to be kind of gross,
right?
But that's not what this story is here. And also I really love that it's not what you would call a monochromatic book, but it's also like just kind of shades and washes of like a very similar tone of colors that really kind of change the mood each scene. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I wonder, like, it does feel like they're playing a lot with color in this book to try to evoke a specific feeling with a lot of the shading. Like, never in my life have I seen a book, I guess that's not true. I've seen some books that play with shadows pretty smartly. This is another one of those books that uses shadows in a way that adds a creepiness factor to things.
Yeah.
Nothing that's going to make your... Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Mike. I would actually love to see a black and white version of this book.
Oh, Danny. Yeah, can we who do we get on the phone with to see if that's a possibility in the future?
let me call Mr. Image.
Yeah, Mr. Image. Exactly. That would be really cool.
Curious, because I haven't had the chance to read any of these Universal Monsters books yet. They're not trying to, like, it is, you said it feels like an anthology, so they're not trying to pull any dark universe crap like Universal tried to do a couple years ago, where they tried to, Avengers, the Universal Monsters.
No, the Universal Monsters books overall seem to just be either retelling existing stories that we know, or they're telling like slightly sequel series, right? Like the Creature from the Black Lagoon book was kind of a sequel. I didn't get too into it. I read 2 issues and I said, I don't know if this is for me. But Universal Monsters Dracula was the exact Dracula story, but told from the perspective focused mostly on Renfield. And some of the other characters as well. But you get all of the classic Bela Lugosi era vampire stuff, right?
Nice.
This Universal Monsters Frankenstein seems to be like retelling the Frankenstein story that you know over and over, but 2 issues in, we're kind of seeing it from 2 very distinct angles. And each angle adds a little bit more depth to the story overall. So, like, I don't know what got into Michael Walsh's head, but this is such a cool way to approach this story that I think most people who live in the Western world kind of already know. Maybe in the globe, in the zeitgeist of the world, everybody kind of knows the Frankenstein story because of how prolific it is. So to retell that story exactly as it is, right? Like, there isn't a change to the story really, so much as we're just getting a little bit more depth to different portions and characters of the story. So it's pretty cool. It's a really, really cool take, I think.
Now, I will tell you, Zach, each issue is introduced by Russell Crowe.
No, Danny. Don't lie to Zach. Do not lie to Zach here. Oh, brother. All right, now I have to move on. I have no choice but to move on. Zach, did you want to talk about one more book? I saw you had it in the notes. Did you want to talk about it real quick?
I can do it real quick. It's called Knights versus Samurai #1 from Image Comics. It just came out. David Dastmalchian, like the polka dot man, if you want to go that route, actor phenomenon, and he's writing comics.
Oh yeah, he did that. He had that horror movie come out pretty recently, right?
Yeah.
That when he's the talk show host.
Yes. Oh my god, it was so good, and I can't think of the title of it.
I'll find it.
It was amazing.
Yeah,
definitely watch it. Art by Danny. Can you help me? I didn't look up the name for this fella, and I don't want to mess it up.
Fede Melee, I think.
Is it Fede
Melee? Probably. Yeah.
Okay. Colors by Ulysses Areola and letters by And World Design. This is a fun book. Conquering hero has killed the last dragon in the North Sea and is now leading a mission into uncharted lands to help spread the word of Christianity and slay whatever beasts might be in their way. Obviously, they wind up in Japan. Then what's cool about this book is it is a version of the medieval period of Europe and Japan where all the myths and legends are real, like krakens and dragons and all that stuff, all real. And obviously the myths and legends of Japan are also real. So when the European knights land in Japan, they really have no idea what they're in for with the people or
Sure.
with the monsters and demons and stuff. And I actually heard Dastmalchian talking about the book on a podcast, which is what caught my attention. And what's cool is like he's got a real love for Japanese history and culture and mythology, and also has found a love for like the histories of Europe and and war and like the knights and stuff. And he wanted to do a comic combining them, and he even brought in the podcast host of a show called Uncanny Japan, Teresa Matsura, to help him make sure that he uses like completely accurate lore and finds like interesting beasties that maybe aren't usually used in, what we see a lot of, as far as Japanese creatures and culture and stuff. The art is really cool, thick lines, kind of dirty, lots of cross hatching. The colors are a bit muted, and it all really fits the story super well. I'm excited to see where it goes. And they only just reached Japan in this first issue, so I'm excited to see where it all begins going forward.
Gotcha. Late Night with the Devil was the movie that I was trying to think of. Yeah.
Oh,
that movie,
it's a lot of fun.
The trailer scares the piss out of me. I don't know if I'll ever watch it. Maybe in the middle of like the day, I'll sit down and watch that movie or something. But I listened to an interview that Dastmalchian did with some guys at the last podcast on the left where he talked about that movie. And I'm just like, oh man, this sounds scary as fuck. I don't know if I can do this.
Dude, it's really well done.
Okay. Well, I'll keep that in my back pocket for this month if I want to be real scared.
I was gonna check out this comic, and then I looked at the synopsis, and I was like, "Oh, this is not gonna be better than Shogun."
The TV show.
Shogun
it's too
is so
recent
good
on my mind, so I'm gonna wait on this because Shogun is so good that nothing that's similar to it is gonna make me happy. So.
Oh man, like I was a fan of the 1970s adaptation of the novel, and it was like a TV miniseries, and it was really good for that era. The interpretation of Japanese people is a little bit stilted because it was the 70s made by white people, but it was still like a pretty overall good interpretation of the novel. But I gotta tell you, man, like this current iteration is just bonkers good, just phenomenal good of Shogun.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. I'll move it to the top of my list. I'll stop watching the backlog of YouTube videos that I have. I'll start watching Shogun. But anyways, let's move on. Let's talk about comics that are on the top of our pile, whether they are new or old or just something you're trying to get off your bookshelf. I want to shout out some of the folks hanging out with us on Discord today. When we made our big call to action to say, what are you reading this week? We got 5 folks who gave us their books. Peyton is going to be reading American Vampire Volume 1. Hugh's going to be reading Absolute Batman #1. Josh is reading Nice House on the Lake. Avocado Kenobi is reading The Terminator #1. And Paul is going to be reading Ain't No Grave. Ain't No Grave is fantastic, Paul. I'm very excited for you to read that. But let me kick things back over to you, Danny. What is on the top of your pile this week?
Well, first I'll say Avocado Kenobi, great pick. I hope you enjoyed while we talked about the book. I didn't want to go into spoilers of the book because I knew that it was on the top of your pile. Plus, it's just coming out as when this drops, so I didn't want to spoil it for anyone. Now, before I get into my pick, which is one of those that it already mentioned on Discord, I want to give a quick shout out to something that's kind of related, the DC All In special. Now, I know what you're thinking. here goes DC again with their gimmicks.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but
That's what I'm thinking.
It's so good. It's so good. Oh my god.
Explain, Danny. What makes this gimmick better than all previous gimmicks?
Well, you know how Marvel did like a mini series and then a one shot to introduce their ultimate universe?
Yeah.
DC did all that in one 48-page book.
Wow. It's
Because
possible.
this is all leading right into the Absolute series that are coming out, and it's so good. We have art by Wes Craig. It's a book that you can so it's got two stories that meet in the middle, so you can actually turn the book upside down.
What?
Yeah, like both
That's
stories
fun.
meet in the middle.
That's
You can
fun.
turn the book upside down. I have a video on my channel if you want to go check it out, where I talk more in depth about this book, but it's so good.
Okay.
Scott Snyder, Joshua Williamson wrote the stories. One story has Daniel St. Pierre and Dan Mora art, and then the other one has Wes Craig art.
My God.
And then, of course, it's got like a double-sided cover that also you can turn upside down. I love having to like mess around with the books like while they're in my hand.
Mm-hmm.
So like having it turn upside down. Like when Greg Capullo made me turn my Batman book upside down to get like to read that whole double spread that he did on the Batman series in New 52. I was like, this is insane. It's probably not the first time it's been done, but it was the first time I had to do it.
Sure.
So I loved it. Yeah. Hugh in the chat saying that Snyder did that with the Court of Owls. So, So now to the top of my pile. It is absolute Batman #1 because, of course, it's absolute Batman #1.
Of course.
I would be kicked out of comic book reading if I didn't pick absolute Batman #1, I think.
Yeah, I think you'd lose your Batman cred. All the Batman cred would be out.
That's right. This is going to be written by Scott Snyder with art by Nick Dragotta. We'll talk about the art in a minute. Colors by Frank Martin, letters by Clayton Coles. So this is the Dark Knight's tale for a new modern age. Like I mentioned, I'm comparing it to the Ultimate Universe just for ease. I don't think it's exactly the same concept, but it's pretty easy for new readers or maybe people that don't get super deep into comics like to understand that concept, right? But in this book, it's Batman, but he doesn't have his mansion, he doesn't have his money, he doesn't have his butler. So what is left of the absolute Dark Knight? Like, if you give me that pitch, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna read that book because it sounds so cool. On top of it, this is a 48-page book that it only costs $5, which is, I think, a good deal for a modern comic book. Now this is the standard cover, so like if you buy a foil cover or some kind of variant, that's on you.
Sure.
Or on me, because I'm sure I'm gonna end up with like 5 or 6 of these.
Yeah, I'm calling Danny's bank right now to let them know that this is happening.
I'll send a follow message. Join the Discord so you can see how many variants I ended up picking up.
Yeah.
So yeah, Scott Snyder. Now Nick Dragotta was the interesting choice for the art here. I've seen what was the book that was kind of manga-like for Image, Mike? Do you remember?
Yeah, he did that book with the guy who did a bunch of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics. He did. Oh, I have a picture of it.
Either way,
like he did East of West with.
Yeah,
Hickman.
he also did. Right. Oh man, what is that series called? It's killing me right now. Go ahead, keep going, Danny.
So I like the idea. A lot of people, when they saw the design for the new Batman, because this new Batman is stacked, like is a gigantic monster of a man. So like Nick Dragotta, of course, has like it just really fits to his style. His art is very dynamic too, which is that's really fun. It is Ghost Cage. Thank you, Paul.
Ghost Cage. Thank you,
That's
Paul.
the one I was thinking of. Yeah,
Ghost
like so
Cage.
if you like that kind of art, now imagine that in a Batman book. Yeah, and a lot of people were complaining like, why is the bat symbol so thick and like big? And then we got a little reveal in the previews that it's because it's an axe. This is a Batman that runs around with an axe in his chest. So, like, how can I not put this at the top of my pile? So there you go. That's it. That's my absolute Batman spiel. I did get the Ashcan at a convention, so I've read like the first few pages of it, and I'm very excited to get into the rest of the book.
Yeah, some of the preview images look sick. I mean, I'm very upset with myself that I really want to read this just for Nick Dragata. Like, I like Scott Snyder's writing. I liked his Batman run. I read most of it back in the day, or at one point, I think after it was all out, I think I was reading it very slowly on like Comixology. But yeah, I really want to see what this team's going to do. And Nick Dragata on freaking Batman is crazy. Like, that's such an absurd
Hell
pick.
yeah.
He's so not standard DC style. So like, I just want to see what he's going to do with this character. It's very exciting for me.
For real. That's what yeah, exactly, that's what makes it exciting, is like, what is this guy gonna do with this beloved character that they usually want to keep a certain status quo with?
Yeah, they're like, everybody needs to draw a little bit like Jim Lee, but Dragata really doesn't. So let's see. This is like putting Riley Rossmo on the main Batman book. Like, it would never work, but I really want to see it, you know?
Yep.
That's exciting. That's exciting, Danny. Well, I'll have to keep my eye out. Luckily, I just went to the comic shop on Saturday, so I won't be back for a couple weeks, so I can prevent myself from buying multiple covers of this book as well. So let me talk a little bit about a book that's on the top of my pile, and that is All Talk by Bartosz Zybtor. I'm sorry if I'm murdering that name. It's a very hard Polish name. This is art by Akusel. This is a graphic novel I picked up only because I saw the preview in previews, right? Like, my comic shop moved over to this new way of managing their comics through Manage Comics, the very popular comic management system that's out there for comic shops. And I was just like browsing through what was new, what was coming out, and I saw this book. And the thing that drew me to it was the art on the story is very, I don't know, I want to say plain, but that's like the wrong way to describe it. It's very simple, but it feels very evocative at the same time. So I'm really curious to see how this book plays out, because the story, I'll just read you the synopsis here. Rahim is a suburban kid like any other, a quote, good kid, chilling with his boys, hearing the legends of a quote, immortal AI, the greatest gangster, or maybe it's Immortal Al. I can't tell with my writing, but whoever lived. It's hard not to get stars in his eyes. Rahim starts dreaming of becoming a kingpin, idolizing his local gangsters in the hopes of climbing their ranks. But his friends laugh. They say he's all talk, no action, until one day he sees an opportunity to prove himself. But how far will he take before there's no turning back? The way that this book is pitched from the publisher is that it's a story about street cred and the like lengths people will go to try to prove themselves. And it sounds like it's not going to necessarily be a happy ending for Rahim. So I'm very curious to know where this book goes. I've got like the hardcover. It's a beautiful book. The colors are very vibrant, and it looks like it's going to be an interesting read. So I'm going to pick this up, and on top of the dozens of other books that I've been sitting on that I just picked up from the shop the other day. So this looks really cool. And it's one of those times where I just said, I'm going to take a chance on an OGN that I've never heard of. It just looks kind of cool. It just sounds kind of cool. I encourage people to do that more often. I promise you, saving 4 Marvel books worth of money to buy a single graphic novel is worth it 8 times out of 10. So that's what I was trying for. So All Talk will be the next book on the top of my pile. I don't know. Do you guys ever do that? Do you just grab random comics from like smaller publishers just to see what it's all about? Or do you just never take the risk?
I love doing that, honestly. And this isn't me. I'm not trying to be like elitist or snobby or anything, but I read way more stuff like that than I do from Marvel and DC anymore. And I think it's because I like delving into those kind of stories and taking chances on stuff like that. Like, I'm totally one of those people that would go into a record shop and just see a cool album cover and be like, I don't know this band, let's check it out. You know?
Sure.
I do the same thing with comics.
Gotcha.
Well, I'm a coward, so I don't do that.
You've got too many Batman books to buy. I understand, Danny. It's okay.
For real.
Okay.
But I have heard of what it's called, Black Label Press, Black Panel Press. I've heard from them.
Yeah, that's who publishes this, by the way.
Black this would make me a little bit more inclined to for sure check it out, especially because you could probably see some previews online. The cover looks very interesting, so I usually, because of my cowardice, I just wait to hear one of you guys talk about a book.
Sure.
Or maybe somebody in the Discord throw it out, and I'm like, okay, it's not like a complete gamble.
Yeah, I'm very excited to try it out. So I'll let you guys know once I finish it, because it's not a huge book, and it's nice. It's one of those hardcovers that's kind of just like really big, which means it's annoying to put on your shelf sometimes because it's like the size of an album. But at the same time, I like books like that. They're like big and easy to read, and I like easy to read comic books sometimes. But I guess, Zach, to wrap up the episode, why don't you tell us on the top of your pile?
Sure. My kind of in a similar vein. This book was put, it's a total instance of you see a cover and you're like, ooh, what's this? And you pick it up and you leaf through, and that's pretty much what I did. It's Violent Flowers #1. The entire book is put together by Maria Lovett, who also did Crave, Luna, and Porcelain. I am not familiar with any of these. Like, I'm not familiar with her, but I was just grabbed by the cover, which is it's a white cover with 3 beautiful women, and the middle woman has like blood coming out of her eyes and her mouth, and she's holding a bloody heart, and then the woman to her right is holding a golden arrow and actually pushing it into the middle woman's chest, but they're all like seductively looking at you while this is happening. I'm like, what is going on? And so I picked it up and I just started kind of eyeballing the art, and I was getting just real Anne Rice, like Queen of the Damned, like Interview with a Vampire vibes from what they're
100%.
doing here. And it's like spooky season, so I was like, sure. And this is all that I know, because all I did was check out the synopsis from Image, so I pulled it from there just in case anyone's interested. It's Vengeance blooms in their veins. Maria Lovett returns with The Violent Flowers, a sensual tale about vengeance and acceptance and the importance of embracing who we really are. An ancient clan of vampires reunites after centuries. The Sentinel, a vampire who watches over all supernatural creatures, has been murdered. His erratic sister, Carmilla, will stop at nothing to get revenge even when she's charged with a mortal to take care of. In a world where the cult of youth and beauty rules, Carmilla has remained old and wrinkled for ages, abstaining from her vampire urges, but her addiction to blood may prove her resolution is not as firm as it seems. And so basically, like, I'm one of those people that will just stop. Like, I looked at the art, I was like, this looks cool. I immediately popped my phone up, read that, and I was like, I'm in. Like, this sounds super interesting to me. I love this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I actually read this pretty recently, the first issue, because shout out to Image for sending us some previews. It's cool, right? Like, Maria Lovett's art, I've seen some of her other books. I think Tia's a big fan of her, so she always kind of pushes those books when she's got a new one coming out, and like, they're always violent and a little like unsettling, but very satisfying. Like, that's the only way I can describe her book. So I'm certain that this will be that same way. And it's vampires. It's October. Come on now. Like, this seems like a natural fit.
And
precisely.
So I'm a big fan of Lovett. I think she's a fantastic Spanish creator. So I was introduced to her work on Faithless, which was written by Brian Azzarello. So I was going into the book because Brian Azzarello wrote it, and I was like, oh, who is this artist? So if anybody wants to at least just try something out from Lovett, there's a one-shot that came out recently called All the Things We Didn't Do Last Night.
Yes.
And if you want just a taste of like the art style, her storytelling style, that is a fantastic book. It's a little when Image was doing their 30th anniversary anthology, like, she did a 3-part story, and that's what this one-shot is. I've also read Violent Flowers. I really enjoyed it. I love the kind of twist on the vampire mythos because of all that. Like, there's a lot of things that are very different. So it's a pretty interesting take on it. And I love Crave. It's about like kind of a killer app.
Yeah. Crave is interesting. Yeah.
I will always check out a new Lovett book. So I'm glad you're checking this out, Zach.
Yeah, you'll have a lot of fun.
Thank you for reminding me. I totally read that one shot and did not put 2 and 2 together that this was the same person. So thank you for that. I'm going to have to go and reread that again. But yeah, so I have read something from Lovett before.
Well, let us know what you think of Violent Flowers after you read it. But I think that's going to wrap up the show for us this week. We may talk a little bit in the post-credits for all the fun patron folks and folks live on Discord. But I want to say thank you to Zach and Danny for making this episode happen. Despite some schedule conflicts, we made the episode work, and I had a great time talking to both of you. Thanks, everyone listening live. You're fantastic human beings. Thanks to Zander for editing the show. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.